Hi everyone. My name's Paul. I lead our Chrome developer relations team, and so it's a pretty fun job to be in, a pretty fun role. We've got about maybe 40 different people on the team who are all engineers building on the web and trying to help developers just be successful. I was originally going to do like a talk around kind of like the future of the web and where we're going. And then I started to think about kind of like what I was trying to get to and what I wanted to try and talk about a little bit more, because the important thing for me is like Chrome Dev Summit, which is an event that happened, last week on November the 5th or 3rd. Actually, I can't remember. It's been that crazy. Like that's one of our moments to actually tell the future of the web platform. And so I kind of wanted to go behind the scenes a little bit and can tell you a little bit more about why we chose what to talk about, because there are a lot of things that happen on the web that is actually kind of fun. That's kind of cool. But I want to just kind of give you a little bit more insight that we don't normally give developers about why we do what we do and kind of why we chose to pick what we did at that point as well. So I think it's pretty good. I'm generally excited at the moment. We normally have this kind of like high level slide that kind of talks about the future of the web and like where we started, and Chrome started at like 2008. We have the comic and all that type of things. I do think there's this kind of like general movement that's happening where people are getting really excited about kind of what's possible on the web at the moment. And these are just two tweets from very recent times, just before Chrome Dev Summit, where two kind of CEOs are talking about, oh, actually the web is a really valuable platform to reach users, to reach people who are using kind of, whether it's their first device or whether it's their desktop device at this point, and they kind of want to do relatively complex things. And I think there's a very nice story across the web about how far the web has come over the last 10 or 15 years. And I don't think we necessarily hit that story with Chrome Dev Summit, but there are things that I want us to be able to kind of talk about and show, because there's a path to where the future of the web is going, which is actually quite, it's different to where the web has been, I think is the easiest way of saying it. And so I'll just kind of keep going and I'll talk about this, but I think there's a very exciting moment in time where people in the industry now are really looking back at kind of, oh, the web is a really viable target to reach people. That point, I think when we talk about the web just broadly and like how we work as a team kind of working with developers, ultimately there's this tension between users and developers at this point. Users want great experiences. People want to have a nice time on the web, and our hypothesis is that people gravitate to the experiences that offer them the best quality of life, quality of access, whatever it is. And in the past that might have been kind of apps, right? Maybe it still is at this point, but ultimately developers, and this whole kind of developer experience argument is that developers want an easy experience. It's not that developers don't want to deliver high quality user experiences. They just want to be able to do it easily and do it well. And so we have this tension. And I think where Chrome has been going over the past couple of years, we push on the capabilities for sure. However, what developers tell us, and these are surveys that we run with about nearly 1,000 developers every quarter, a random sample of developers across the web, they don't tell us that features are what they need. Like they're pretty happy with kind of the capability of what's possible on the web. Where they struggle is actually just kind of keeping up with what's happening. When I look back at Chrome, ultimately, it changes every 4 weeks. We add a whole bunch of new features and capabilities. And as a developer audience and a developer ecosystem, it's like, how do you keep up? like it's impossible for an average developer just any developer to kind of keep up with what's happening on the platform, unless you are right on the bleeding edge and you're happy with living in that kind of uncertainty. And like the other kind of part of the story I see is that developers struggle to make an experience work across every single browser. For me, one of the frustrations I have is, and this is not a slight at Apple or anything, but like you need an Apple device to build something that works on an iOS. And when I go out and work with a whole bunch of developers that are just outside of Europe and outside North America, those are hard things for people to rationalize and reason about. They have an audience which uses every single device possible that you could think about, but they don't have the tools necessarily. And so I kind of want to get to this point of, how do we help developers ultimately understand and do the things that they, or understand what to do, but actually do the things that are the most important to them, not what they think or what we think are necessarily the most important things for them to focus on around, maybe, a brand new capability from the Fugu API project as well. And so I think where developers are and then where Chrome is just like a little bit different place. And so one of the things that I'm working on over the next year, and we tried to start it with this kind of Chrome Dev Summit as well, is actually meeting developers a little bit more closer to where they are, right? Actually solving their use cases. If testing across multiple browsers is one of their biggest issues and the biggest pain point that you have as a developer ecosystem, you know what, Chrome and the DevRel team should actually help with that. We shouldn't actually push against that narrative, at least anyway. And so at least with the Chrome Dev Summit, this is actually our internal slides, so I'm kind of giving you a bit of a secret, I suppose, to some extent. When I went and pitched Chrome Dev Summit to our leadership to get funding for it this year, I pitched it as like it's Chrome's moment to give developers and decision makers just the clarity of what they need to prioritize to build high quality sites and apps. And it sounds kind of high level, but the emphasis behind this is that I want us to be able to think about users, people on the web, maybe a little bit more so than developers, but understanding that developers have to deal with the fact that their users have got expectations and their businesses have got expectations and needs as well. And so I tried to summarize it as an overarching theme. It's just like people want high quality sites and developers want to do it easily. And I don't necessarily know whether we got there with the Chrome Dev Summit, but this is definitely where we're leading our team, right? Ultimately over in the future is like you can't get away from the fact that we need high quality user experiences on the web. But we want to make sure that developers have the path to doing it, and it's not a hard path to follow. People call it like falling into the pit of success. I think that's ultimately what we want to try and get to. And so we had this notion of kind of different goals. We want to make sure that developers understand quite clearly what's happening. We want to showcase like some of our bigger initiatives that we're working on as well. CoWork Vitals, and I'll talk about these Privacy Sandbox and the advanced apps message as well. But actually, people are excited about the future, and I think a lot of the story for the web recently it feels relatively negative. The web is, there's obviously privacy work that we need to do in this space. The web is getting to this point of, you browse any piece of content and it's full of ads or pop-ups and all these types of things. There's a definite kind of pathway to a nicer, more user-friendly web in the future. And we want to give people the inspiration of people who followed that path already, kind of showcase like what's possible in the near future as well. And so, sorry, struggling to press the next slide. And so again, this is another internal slide as well, but like my ultimate goal was to not have, the normal kind of Chrome Dev Summit where there's, 30 talks all about different things, about exactly what to focus on and what's cool on the web. Just one talk, right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you the most important things that we think you should be looking at and considering, and then just give you access to more of the Chrome team, right? And so the third point on the right there is, this is the most engagement that we've had in a long time inside Chrome. And it's something that I want to use as a base and a starting ground, not like, oh, we've just done this 1 week of, extra office hours and speaking to developers. No. It should be a long-term conversation with developers going forwards. And so I have had this kind of like overarching pitch, and I think we've definitely done kind of all these different pieces. But the point for me is more about Chrome listening and understanding and then responding to developer need. Less so about kind of like showcasing exactly what's brand new and landed this month, right? Because I think that actually makes a distraction and doesn't help you as a developer ecosystem with everything that you need to do every single day. And so one of the first things that we've seen recently, and there's been a bit of an uproar. I got some of the data wrong when I wrote some of the stats, but we had this process on compatibility. We've done a lot of work in the industry trying to understand where each of the browsers are not compatible with each other, because one of the things that developers tell us is making an experience work across multiple browsers is incredibly hard. And the first area that people tell us where the frustration lands is compact. Web compact every single year is the hardest thing that developers struggle with. You have to work across iOS, you have to work across Firefox, you have to work across Chrome, the incarnations of Chrome and Blink, and all these different kind of browsers that you have to work with, not to mention things like IE. You know what, we should make sure the platform meets the spec, or at least meets how the other browsers work on that side. And so the Compact 2021 project just prioritized some parts of CSS where we knew that we could have an impact and actually make developers' lives easier. We know Flexbox and Grid are the future of layout. Just make sure it works the same across all the browsers at that point. Things like aspect ratio and position sticky, loads of bugs, loads of issues. And ultimately, people don't use these features that we think they're good because they struggle with Compact. And like I've updated the numbers recently, but the story that we wanted to tell is not, oh, Firefox is bad, Safari is bad, or Chrome's the better, whatever it is. It's like, no, actually, every single browser in the last 6 to 12 months has made massive strides in improving compatibility on the web. And I think that's a point to celebrate. It's a kind of a whole situation here where it's just like, you know what, developers' lives are easier. You might not feel it right now, but the next 6 months, I think it's going to be a lot better. You're going to be able to kind of build the designs that you want to build more easily at that point. Our next kind of focus as well was on privacy. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this. I'd actually encourage you to watch the keynote, but the emphasis behind this was just like, there's a lot of change come into the web. Third-party cookies, essentially across all the browsers, there's a move to kind of remove third-party cookies from across the web. And I think there's been a fair bit of misunderstanding or confusion about how this process is working. Just a little bit more broadly. And so I kind of wanted to give everyone in the audience, at least two different kind of calls to action. One is we have a roadmap on Privacy Sandbox. This is Chrome's perspective of the privacy changes that are coming to the web, and kind of gives you an overarching timeline about kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. But more importantly, there's also, I don't know why the icon's not showing, but more importantly, there's actually a developer-facing documentation as well. So if you go to developer.chrome.com/privacy sandbox, you should be able to get all the information that you need to understand how to implement the changes that are coming through. But actually, more importantly, it's not about the changes that are here right now. It's the giving developers, you all here, kind of the understanding about, we're not making these changes just like willy-nilly and doing whatever we want whenever we want. It's actually quite a principled process, and there's 3 different distinct phases that we go through across the life cycle of any one particular API that's kind of coming through. And these APIs are taking a long time to land, and I think that's the right thing. But there's also different places where you, as the developer audience and ecosystem, you get to critique the process, the changes that are happening. You get to understand what's coming through. You get to give feedback on whether these are the right solutions as well. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen recently as well, is this is probably one of the most open ways to give feedback that we've had across. You don't have to always do it through the W3C. Although this slide here says it's in the W3C. There's a lot of different kind of community groups that are all focused around improving privacy. And at least on the community group side of things, it's open for everyone to be able to kind of provide feedback and input about the direction of privacy across the web. And I think this is one of those kind of really quite exciting things where it's okay that these changes are going to take more time to kind of come through, because they ultimately are going to impact the way that we think about the web going forwards. We want to make sure identity works well on the web. We want to make sure payments work well on the web, but all with a kind of privacy preserving focus, which, unfortunately right now, we rely on third-party cookies, and third-party cookies have those kind of holes in. I think the other piece that we wanted to get to as well with Privacy Sandbox was that ultimately, once there's a point of this discussions are happening and the shape of the APIs are coming through and the use cases are solidified, these things kind of need to get kind of tested out as well. And Chrome has got these 2 methods of testing. One is feature flags, and the idea behind feature flags is that you can just test everything behind the scenes. It's not available on the public web, but you get to see whether these APIs actually work, whether they actually meet your use cases. And they're not kind of out there kind of breaking the web. And then the next phase obviously is origin trials. And the idea behind origin trials was originally kind of introduced for advanced capabilities. We want to be able to add APIs onto the web, but without breaking the web. And so there's an explicit contract between a developer and the browser at this point that you're going to enable this origin trial. An API will become available just on your site, and then you won't be able to kind of you'll ship it to all your users, or you'll be able to A/B test to kind of see how these APIs work. But at some point, the origin trial will end and the API will be gone as Chrome then starts to think about how it refactors the APIs. And again, with the idea behind the Privacy Sandbox, those same pieces are also at play in this space here. Is we need to get real world feedback, but we don't want to break the web. We don't want to go back to the point of having vendor prefixes across like we did with CSS and JavaScript. We don't want to go back to that world. But we do need to get real world feedback as well. And origin trials are our way of doing that on that side. And then there's this idea of things like scaled adoption as well. When things are ready, when they've been tested at scale, essentially, in the testing processes, they've gone through the, the spec processes as well. We want to see things like, how do we help you get these changes adopted? Because one of the things that happens in Chrome is we announce maybe a deprecation or a breaking change to a piece of functionality. Maybe like the UA string reduction that's just been announced as well, where we're going to give you less information about, a less specific information about the user through the user agent string. So there's a plan coming there, but we need to give you way more information about when these things are happening and when you can expect them to come through as well. And so I think there's a bit here of we're looking at how these processes change as well, because we don't want any of these things to be a surprise. Ultimately, when third-party cookies are removed from the web across all the browsers, because every single browser is pushing towards this, and that's the ultimate goal, we still want the web to function, and we've got to make sure that developers have the time and the space to be able to move and make those moves, but also understand when these things are happening as well. But I think the other bit as well is that whenever like an API or a piece of existing functionality is removed, a new, better piece of infrastructure will come along, right? And actually will make sure that, they're available to browsers. And user agent client hints is one of those examples where you can get some basic information without having to pass the user agent string. Really, this should just be a nicer, easier way to actually understand and get the data out of what was in the user agent string. But then also kind of, if you really do need more information, you can then request it from the user, so you can get that information coming through. But I think more broadly, the point was there's a very gradual and not gradual, but like there's a very kind of distinct set of phases and processes that we're making with any of these processes change. And I think it's important for the ecosystem to kind of engage, keep Chrome, keep the W3C, keep all of the browser vendors honest about these privacy changes that are coming through. And so, ultimately, I think I just wanted to make sure that every single developer went away from the Chrome Dev Summit understanding that there is a process and there's very clear guidelines about how we work, but you've also got the visibility into kind of what's happening in that space. The third point, and I'm going to keep going pretty quick, but the third point as well is that we've got this thing called amazing apps, right? Like, I don't think we necessarily call that in like internally, but like it's basically a combination of Fugu, which is a list of capabilities, all these different capabilities, and progressive web applications as well. And like ultimately, one of the things that I've realized over the last maybe year or so is that I think each one of these individual APIs is brilliant. The fact that you can access USB and it's done in a privacy preserved and in a secure way at this point, or with user opt-in, I think is great. I think it's brilliant. It opens up a whole new number of different case studies or opportunities and use cases. But as developers, this gets back to the confusion piece. Like every single one of these APIs on this sheet has got a set of articles, and we've gone out going, this is amazing, go away and play around with all these different APIs. And I think as developers, it's like, it's cool. I just need to get my job done right now. It's like there's a lot in that space, and so I've been starting to think about like actually we need to change the way our narrative works in this space. It's not about the APIs and the technology; it's about the use cases that you can solve. And I don't know whether the video is going to play. Oh, it does play actually. It's great. One of the kind of reasons that we had this section this way was we've got a number of partners and developers who built really amazing things across the web, all powered by web technology. Kapwing has got like an inbuilt video editor. And I wanted to kind of change the story from this is the technology, like really cool, like this is the API, to this is what you can build on the web. It's flipping amazing. And then this is how you build it, right? And then these are how you integrate some of these newer APIs. And I think that's where you're going to start to see our team and kind of Chrome go forwards in the future. And so with Kapwing, they're using kind of web workers, media recorders, web audio API. Some of these APIs have been around for 5 or 6 years, but they've been able to kind of pull together a really amazing experience. And that's the story that I want to be able to tell developers and tell the ecosystem is like, you can do really great things on the web without having to necessarily rely on super bleeding edge features as well. And so I want to kind of level the web up and bring the web up a little bit more on that side. And I think, the other examples, like we talked about Google Meet, like just looks like Google Meet. We're doing this right now, over this chat, over this presentation. But ultimately, like really what they did was like, they've obviously made it a repeatable way. I think that's great. It's installable. It's in the places that a user would expect an installed application to be. But they also integrated kind of things like WebAssembly and SIMD to actually provide way more capabilities and performance on it. Just as a developer, you don't see it. As a user, you don't see it. You just experience a better experience, I suppose, at this point. But the application of the technology is the important thing. And I think that's the story that I want to try and get out a little bit more when it's coming through. And then obviously, actually the graphics are a bit weird. My Chromebook is a little bit broken at the moment. We also announced or helped announce and support the Photoshop on the web as well. And so Adobe had some really good stories to tell on that side. And I think the bit here is, they're bringing a whole suite of applications to the web ultimately, and starting with Photoshop on the web. There's a link to the case study that we've got. But really, again, this is just about the application of existing technology that's been on the web, application of newer APIs that have come through as well. But it's really about what you can experience with the web and how you can experience kind of modern, advanced experiences. And I think that's quite an exciting story to tell. And I think we've got to do a lot more in that space. But I just wanted to make sure that developers have that, oh, wow, you can do this with the web. and it's actually feasible. It's not like you have to wait for every single API to come to every single browser. You can get some great experiences. And I think this Adobe case study as well is one of those ones where, Apple are also working on helping Adobe bring this to Safari users as well, because there is some technology that is not available right now in Safari, the Storage Foundation API in particular. But they will come. And I think this is just a nice story to kind of keep pushing, like, wow, like you can do more with the web, and it's kind of amazing. The fourth point was, I'm not going to go through it pretty quickly, but it was CoWork Vitals. Ultimately, we want to make sure that users have a great experience on the web. And CoWork Vitals is essentially 3 sets of metrics that we've been able to use that quantifies what we believe are the basis, not everything about what a great experience is, but the basis of a good web experience. And right now it's relating around loading performance, input responsiveness, and visual stability. The 3 metrics that we can actually measure in the wild across the ecosystem to understand whether your users of your sites actually have a good experience as well. And obviously you can measure it in that space. And it's actually gone pretty well. Like ultimately, we've seen 20%, I think, more page visits in Chrome meet the recommended, CoWork Vitals thresholds. So we know that more people are getting better experiences across the web. And I think we now say that 60% meet the 60% of all page visits inside Chrome meet the recommended CoWork Vitals. And so we're actually quite excited by that because, ultimately we've got to this point where people are experiencing faster sites and more stable sites and getting less frustrated, which I think is great. I think there's a lot more to do though. It's not just about these individual metrics. Like there's only 3 right now. There'll be more that kind of come through. At some point it'd be great. And I don't know whether this will ever be one. But, hey, we can detect whether people are doing, obsessive pop-ups. Obsessive? It's the wrong word. Excessive pop-ups, right? And getting them in the way of the user and like those types of things. And like, ultimately drive users and developers to have better experiences more broadly across the ecosystem. And this is just a slide to say that actually it's not just about apps and all that type of stuff. If you use a CMS, the CMSs are starting to kind of get to the point where, they're building this kind of faster experience just basically into the framework of the ecosystem that they're already using as well. I think more importantly though, one of the other bits was the CoWork Vitals team has recognized that actually developers struggle to test. They struggle to test the performance of their sites, especially across journeys as well. And so we've kind of made some significant updates to the tooling. It got delayed, and so we didn't pull it from the keynote, but PageSpeed Insights is going to get an update pretty soon that focuses a lot more on field data, the CoWork Vital data that we've got, as well as lab data. We'll do an announcement about that soon, but we didn't want to not talk about it because PageSpeed Insights, like it's nearly every single web developer seems to use it. And there's been definite variability and some frustrations, and there's a lot of improvements kind of coming through on that site. And I think the other bit here is like, we do hear that developers struggle with end-to-end testing. When we do our surveys that we talked about at the start of the presentation, every developer's like, I don't know what to test. I struggle. It's really hard to build tests. And so we've taken that on to kind of like, we want to help you measure and improve your user flows. And there's a number of places that we're doing that. The first is inside Lighthouse. And so you can script out a whole navigation through your site and then look at the performance scores and the best practices of what a user might do inside your site. So if you've got like a checkout flow, like you could measure that and repeatedly measure that over time to be like, okay, cool. Like actually the performance of every single step is great. Cool, we don't need to do any more work. Or you might identify the fact that, actually when you come to doing the checkout, you've got a serious regression in either performance, accessibility, or, in other areas as well. And then the final piece as well is that we want to enable it so that you can record those flows inside DevTools. And so there's a new panel kind of coming. It's an experimental feature right now, but we're hoping to get it landed pretty quick. But you'll be able to kind of measure, and you basically, well, not measure, but like, run through your site and record a flow and then just replay it on your side. But then you can also integrate that script into things like Puppeteer as well. So then you could then, every time you do a deploy, you could make sure that it runs through this script and you can see the performance and do all the other things that you might do with Puppeteer as well. So I think there's some really powerful changes coming through at this point. What I would say is if you can definitely try it out and give us feedback about what you want from this, it's going to be very nice. And actually, we're quite excited by this feature because it's been a highly requested one. And I think one of the final areas ultimately was the delightful design. I feel like, at least in the Chrome team, or at least my team, we focused way too much on just purely JavaScript developers. And we've worried about, oh my God, like developers are moving to React. Everyone's doing JavaScript. There's too much JavaScript going on. And there's a whole industry of designers and web designers out there, which is just like, we're not always talking to. We need to work with them a lot more. And they've got kind of a lot of feedback and needs that we've not quite serviced properly. And I think one of the bits here that the screen's gone crazy again, so sorry about that. Is ultimately we're getting to this point where the web is getting a lot more user preferences in. So people are telling us, for instance, dark mode, reduced motion, a whole bunch of other things in this space as well, where it's like, we need to think about how do we help developers reason and understand about how do they build designs that work across a variety of different user modalities. One example, I know Samsung have been releasing a lot of foldable phones. People are kind of excited about foldables. When a new form factor like this comes to the ecosystem, the web is always behind kind of all the rest of the ecosystem. But we need to work out how do we deal with that properly? Like, how do we build experiences that work across multiple different device form factors? Because we don't know the popularity of this right now, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we don't always jump on the newest thing. But at some point, we're going to have to start to think about dealing with it. There'll be future different ways of interacting with the web. And we want to make sure that you, as a set of designers, for instance, actually have the tools available to you. One of the biggest pieces that we've come through, and this is more speculative, but it's landing, and are actually quite excited by it as well because it's landing across all browsers. It's essentially component queries, component queries at this point. I'll let you go and read the articles about it on web.dev, at least anyway. But the idea behind this is that rather than having to have like a complete macro layout and design at the kind of the page level, you can have it just purely at the component level. You can build better, more responsive experiences on that side. It's basically one of the number one features that developers have been asking for years, and it's finally on the roadmap to actually land across all the browsers, which is pretty good. And I think the other bit here is that we also recognize that we don't help you as developers and designers do what you want to do, right? You have to go and try and find out how to, I mean, say you want to do a grid or a carousel or those types of things, you have to work it out yourself pretty much at the moment. And I think we've taken it on as our team to be like, oh, no, we can definitely help you build all these components, use modern CSS and design principles to actually kind of get to the point of like, you've got a fast experience, you've got a good experience, you've got an accessible experience that ultimately lets you. I don't know why I chose this screenshot, because deconstructed pancakes is not the best example. But ultimately, we got this idea of like, patterns that will help you do things like carousels, things like tabs, do it well and have all your users have a great experience with it, but also not kind of have to pull your hair out as developers. And so I think the bit that we're trying to get to is we recognize that we've underserved designers over the last couple of years. We're making big changes in that space as well. And I think one of them is, we want to make sure that we've got a whole set of Learn courses available. And the one that we've been working with Jeremy Keith on as well is like Learn Design, where we're actually kind of giving you the goal is to give you all the principles about to understand and realize and rationalize how to think about design components that are just above kind of like basic CSS. And so you might be thinking about kind of like text and typography and how to bring in fonts and how to space fonts and line height. Like, we should give you that guidance, because I know trends and tastes change, but the fundamentals are always the same. And like, we've got the time and space to be able to deliver that information. And so we should do that. And that's what I want us to be able to do as well going forward. And so I think just to wrap up, like my ultimate goal really is we need to help designers and developers across the ecosystem way more. I think we're starting. I think we're doing all right. Definitely more to do. I would encourage everyone to check out /learn. On web.dev, because there's more courses coming through. We've worked with a whole number of ecosystem and industry partners. So for instance, like forms, everyone seems to do forms wrong, or what we think are doing forms wrong. People struggle with building good forms. We want to make sure you've got the guidance to be able to do that. And so we've built the course for you to be able to do that. Responsive design, again, Jeremy Keith, industry expert, has been able to kind of bring together some of his learning and understanding over the years to kind of pull together this course. There'll be more and more of these coming out, but like, I think this is the bit of just improving developer clarity is you shouldn't have to worry about the principles and best practices. Like we'll get that covered, and then you can build better experiences on top of that. And then you can kind of like integrate that into your frameworks and your tooling in the ecosystem. So ultimately we'll get there. It's a slow process, but I'm actually quite excited with where we've got so far. And so, yeah, this is kind of me nearly finishing. If there was any one takeaway from this, I'd encourage people to go to web.dev to check out like Well, I'll rephrase it. Web.dev is changing. It looks like a Chrome blog right now. We're going to sort that out. I think it's a fair point if anyone has that criticism, to be more about kind of very practical guidance that helps developers every single day in building out your kind of modern websites. And then also follow Chromium Dev on Twitter as well, because that's where the first place that we get to announce things that are coming through on that side. And I also have a shameless bit of self-promotion. If you want to hear more, you can always follow me on Twitter or just kind of read my blog. I update it, trying to do a couple times a month. It's been a little bit slower recently, but I get to moan about things a little bit more kind of freely than I can when I'm doing a presentation. So definitely check those out and hit me up with any questions if you have any.